Hi, podcast listeners. This is your host, Jenna Pecor, and I'm so excited to bring you our episode for today. If you are a first-time listener or a listener who has been with me since day one and you love what I'm doing, I want to encourage you to support the podcast by giving a small donation. I love bringing you new faces and interviews, but it does take time and resources to do it. And any support you'd be willing to give goes towards website upkeep, travel, time, and costs, and would help me greatly to keep doing what I'm doing. Give your support by going to paypal.me/Faces of Grand Prairie. On today's episode, we have a special out-of-town guest, Mr. Mike Geer. Mike is the manager of the Arasas County Airport in Rockport, Texas, as well as a veteran of the United States Airforce, and was one of the key point people during Hurricane Harvey and in the cleanup and rebuilding of the city after. He talks with me about how he got into a career in aviation and air traffic control, what it was like to be in the midst of a Category 4 hurricane, how he handled getting a visit from the Vice President of the United States just a few days after the storm, and his feelings of love and appreciation for his fellow Texans as they came together to help the town of Rockport recover. Mike is a dear friend of mine, and I'm so grateful he agreed to let me talk to him, and I think that you'll find him just as interesting as I always do. Enjoy! Hello, Mike. How are you?
Hi, good morning. Doing good.
Good morning. And just to let everybody know, I did not get to go down all the way to Rockport to go interview Mike today, although I just got to see him and his wife just a few weeks ago. So we're doing this over the phone, but the way that I know Mike is my best friend Reagan, when she lived up here in DFW and we worked together. We met Mike when he lived in DFW, and they ended up, he got a job down in Rockport, and so they moved down there a few years ago. But I was able to go down and visit and have been down there several times. And one of the reasons I asked Mike to join me today is because he was part of the, during the Hurricane Harvey, he was part of the key people that was kind of helping with that effort of going through that hurricane and then the cleanup afterwards. And I thought you'd be a very good person to talk about the city, how the city kind of came together to deal with the national disaster and that type of thing. So I just really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're working today, so you're taking an hour
That's
out
all
of your
right.
day. I appreciate it.
This is my lunch break.
Oh, good. So you're just sacrificing eating. That's nothing.
I may actually eat while we record, but you won't hear me.
Okay, good. So tell me, Mike, how did you get into the aviation industry?
Well, I guess anybody that has ever been in the aviation business, it started when they were a kid, just having the desire to be around and work around planes. But ultimately, I probably didn't have the resources that some kids have whenever I was younger to actually get to fly a lot. In fact, the first time I ever flew on a plane was after I'd enlisted in the U.S. Airforce, and I flew my very first time to San Antonio to go to boot camp. And
wow,
that was
really?
Yeah, I was 20 years old. I'd never even been on a plane. So, so go figure. I was fascinated with planes and wanted to be around them, wanted to work around them, but I'd never actually even been on one until I was 20 years old. And
after you joined the Air Force.
But yeah, right. And so after I joined the Air Force, I flew all over the world. But I was an air traffic controller, and so I had most of my time in the Air Force really was training. I only did a 4-year enlistment. But as a controller, you train constantly, and anytime you go to a new location, you have to train at that location because every place is different. Your altitudes are different, your frequencies are different, your patterns and procedures are different at every place. And so while there's some basic phraseology and basic knowledge that goes with you to everywhere you control traffic, there's specificities that you have to learn at each place, and not to mention you have two very different facets of air traffic control. You have radar and tower, and I had certifications in both, and so I spent literally the entire time training.
Wow.
But yeah, so that's how I got into the the business of working around planes and working around airports and learning how to speak the jargon. It's a whole language,
right,
in and of itself.
So you now,
And that's kind of the key to me. That's the key for just about any business. If you want to sell drill bits or tires, if you learn to speak the language, you can be good at it.
absolutely.
And you can fake it till you make it.
Absolutely. So you grew up in DFW, but you have ties to Rockport, or where did you grow up?
Yeah. So the way that worked is I actually grew up in Fort Worth. I was born in Fort Worth, and we moved around the state a little bit. My dad followed jobs from Houston, Waco, Tyler. We lived in Tyler the longest other than Fort Worth, but ended up back in Fort Worth in my high school years. And so that was always kind of home base for me. But so the how Rockport factors into it is my family, both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side, used to come here from the 1950s on. And so it was natural that we just kind of worked it into our family vacation every year. And sometimes it was twice a year. And we'd come down just to go fishing, go to the beach and go fishing. And so I fell in love with Rockport. I know my sisters all did. And I think I remember even at a young age, we all decided that if we could one day, we'd all like to live down here. And now every one of us do.
Right. Yeah, your whole family lives down there. It kind of factors into our story a little bit that your sister, your brother-in-law, and your niece are all have been involved or are still involved with the Rockport Police Department, and which kind of factors into, as we go on and kind of talk about how this all transpired, with the hurricane, how a city kind of comes together and deals with that. But so I know that you got offered that job to go down there. So explain to people, because this is a private airport, but explain to them how that works when it comes to like the federal government and the FAA and all that kind of stuff when it comes to the type of airport that you manage.
Sure. Well, it actually is not a private airport. It's just the opposite. It's a public airport. And that's one of our grant requirements. As far as our assurances go, we have to remain public. We can't ever privatize it. The day we privatize, we have to pay back every grant we've had for the last 30 years, which is just absolutely impossible. So we have an obligation to remain public and to remain operating as an airport. Moreover, a lot of people don't understand that. They think you can just shut an airport down and move it or whatever, but really you can't. You have obligations. If you've ever taken grant money, and most every airport has, but once you take that grant money, you're beholden to operate the land that it sits on as an airport in some shape, form, or fashion. Now, you can make decisions on how big you want to make it, how much you want to bring it, scale it back. You want to maintain a runway, don't maintain a runway. We're not going to have this procedure or instrument approach, whatever. But, you still have an obligation to maintain it as an airport. So, no, we're very public. And we get our money in, again, the same way that most airports get their money. We sell a lot of fuel. We have some hangars that we rent. We have land leases. And then the grants, and the grants, while some years it may only be 5 or 10% of our income or our revenue, they're still, you have to have those to sustain, because grants are, while it may look like free money, you have the assurances that you have to adhere to, but it is free money in that you can do some really big projects,
right,
with that federal money. And so this is we're a non-primary entitlement airport, and moreover, we're a general aviation airport. So you may look at something like DFW, and that's a primary entitlement airport, and it's commercial aviation. So they get their money out of a completely different pot than we do. But all of our grants are derived from aviation-related taxes. So the average taxpayer really doesn't pay a whole lot into the pot that we get our money out of, unless you fly a lot.
Gotcha.
Unless you fly commercially, some of that money comes out of the seat for the plane. Some of it comes out of what the airline had to pay for the fuel. It also comes from our own fuel sales. But the average citizen doesn't pay a whole lot into any airport unless they fly a lot.
So what about
in my airport? This airport in particular, we don't take a single tax dollar from the local tax base. So out of the county, even though we are a county operated airport, we have an enterprise fund, which means we make our own revenue, and we put the money up for our own budget every year. And and we have to make money to sustain ourselves. If we don't, then we have to look at our business model and maybe retool a little bit. But right now, it's kind of a time of flux. Obviously, we had the hurricanes, so we don't know what normal is yet. But the day that we don't make money at this airport, we have to kind of step back and take a look at how we're doing business.
Well, to give the listeners some perspective, because all of our listeners are from Grand Prairie. You're familiar with Grand Prairie. You've lived in DFW.
I know it well. Yeah. Yes, I know it well. I have, believe it or not, I've got customers here that on my airport. I think I've told you about a couple of them that are were former citizens of Grand Prairie that have gone off and seen the world and for whatever reason landed in Rockport. So I know some folks that know your dad.
That's right.
We talked about that too.
That was funny that day whenever you made that connection. I was like, oh my gosh, what a small world. So I know that to give them some perspective, because I know that in their minds, they're probably thinking of the Grand Prairie Municipal Airport, which would be pretty similar. If you go down to see your airport, the two of them look kind of the same as far as like the size and the amount of land and all that stuff. Yeah. So do the two function in the same way?
Yeah, but we're both GA Airport, stands for General Aviation. So airports are classified as General Aviation. That's your small country rural airport. Then you have Reliever Airport, which is a little bit bigger. They can take like your regional flights, and then you have your commercial airports, your big ones that are really super hardened, and the TSA has their grip on it.
Right.
But so in that area right down there where you're talking about where Grand Prairie is. Grand Prairie is a general aviation airport, but if you go over to Arlington Municipal, it's more of a reliever type airport. I gotcha. And they all share airspace with DFW. It's amazing to think about how they manage that airspace, but it's a tough job, but they get it done. But so we're real similar to Grand Prairie. We probably have about twice the land that GP has, but very similar operations.
Yeah. You've explained to me about. We could have a whole nother call just about how air traffic, like how you manage the airspace in terms of where people fly and the level. I mean, Mike and I have had so many conversations about this. It's very interesting. But even though you guys are set up that way, y'all still are under the advisement of the FAA, which is the federal. What does that stand for?
Federal Aviation Administration. And so, yes, we are absolutely under. We operate under their guidelines. Everything we do. They have FARs, which are Federal Aviation Regulations, and then we have a section or a part that we operate under, and under that part, there's guidelines on what we can and can't do, what kind of training we have to fuel certain type of aircraft. We can actually fuel and handle charter aircraft here, even though our only charters that we deal with are going to be like helicopters that ferry offshore workers out to the rigs and back.
Gotcha. So and so what we were kind of talking about was you also have weather tracking equipment and weather. So talk about kind of how the National Weather Service uses, when we're kind of starting to talk about a storm and, conditions of flying, how does that function into your airport? Like, how do y'all monitor all that?
Well, our airport weather observation system is maintained and owned actually by the National Weather Service. So it's equipment that's on our airport, which is not uncommon. It happens at most little airports. With the small exception that we don't own it, we don't maintain it. The National Weather Service does all that. So we actually have a pretty good setup, and we don't have to put any money aside to budget for repairs for the AWOS, and the AWOS again is a huge piece of equipment that can measure wind speed. It can measure your ceilings. It can measure visibility, precipitation, temperature, dew point, humidity, your barometric pressure, everything. And but the National Weather Service gets their weather information, historical data for Rockport from the equipment on our field. So while it may be raining at my house 2 miles away and it's not raining here, we didn't get any rain that day, if you know what I mean. From a record keeping standpoint.
So, are they allowed to, like, how do y'all determine if the weather is too bad? Who gets to make that decision? If the weather's too bad, you say we're not going to do flights anymore?
So remember the FARs I talked about earlier, the Federal Aviation Regulations. There are stipulations in there that talk about what your minima are to be able to fly or operate in certain airspace and whatnot. But our minima here are I think it's we have a quarter-mile visibility and 250 feet ceiling, I think. So it's pretty low. You can instrument approaches that'll bring you right directly to the runway within a foot or two. So really, it's just how brave are you?
Right.
When do you need to see the runway? When do you want to punch out of the clouds or call your call your go no go
Right.
point? So, but yeah, so we operate, and our winter here is never that it's really cold. It's just that we have really low ceilings all day long for weeks.
Right.
And today is actually a really nice day, but it's a break because all this week so far has been bad. All next week is going to be bad. So yeah, we really rely on those instrument approaches. But so yeah, the FAA has weather minima. So you have two types of flight. You have visual flight rules, and then you have instrument flight rules. And if you're on the ground in instrument flight rule conditions, it's called IMC, which is instrument meteorological conditions. But if you're flying, you're and you're flying in the soup, or you're flying in the clouds or whatever, or above a certain altitude, you're flying what's known as IFR, instrument flight rules. And that as far as an airport is concerned, that number that we're looking for is a ceiling of 300 feet or less and visibility less than a mile. And at that point, I'm sorry, 1,000 feet and visibility, 1,000 feet ceiling and visibility of 3 miles. So once those minima have been exceeded, then you're in instrument meteorological conditions on the ground, which means you have to have your lights on, you have to have your beacon on, you have to. There's a whole other set of rules that you operate by.
And how far is the airport away from the coastline, from the ocean?
I have coastline. There's coastline on both sides of the airport. So the airport property actually consists of about a mile of beachfront. We'll never develop it. It would be counterproductive. Yeah, it would be counterproductive for the airport to develop the land that it owns on the beach, because anytime you start sticking something in airspace, then it affects your instrument approaches. It affects safety. Mm-hmm. And the most valuable thing this airport has, the most valuable thing that most general aviation airports have, are their instrument approaches. They cost a lot of money to shoot. They're very valuable with respect to what kind of planes you can land at your airport. And if you can land a big plane that's capable of flying that instrument approach in bad weather, then you're probably going to get a fuel sale out of it. And that's what you're trying to attract at the end of the day.
Right.
So the instrument approaches we guard those with everything that we have. So in speaking of that, we actually own air easements over the top of certain properties that are over the runway approaches. So we have 2 landing strips, but they're actually 4 runways. Each end is considered its own runway. And of the 4 runways of the 4 approaches, we have aviation easements over 3 of them. And the one that we just don't need it because it's ocean.
Our episode today is brought to you by DeBisky High School's Aviation Technology Pathway. The GPISD Aerospace Academy, 9th through 12th grade, is a first-of-its-kind, comprehensive, and ambitious program to prepare students for a career in the aerospace industry. This unique high school program of choice involves a career technical education CTE component, as well as a rigorous college preparatory side with dual credit and advanced placement courses. Partnerships with aerospace companies provide internships, program support, and hands-on learning opportunities. While in the program, students may receive CTE program certifications, which lead to FAA industry certifications as an air traffic controller, aviation mechanic, a pilot, or unmanned aircraft systems UAS drones. To find out more about this and other amazing pathway programs, call DeBisky High School at 972-343-7800.
To give people an idea of what the demographic of as far as Rockport looks like, there are a lot of people that do fly into that airport, and there's a lot of people that vacation in Rockport, and there's a lot of really big, beautiful houses that are in Rockport that are sometimes secondary and vacation homes. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of trying to set the stage for like when we start talking about the storm in a city like the one that you have, as in terms of understanding how much stuff was actually in this town in terms of boats and and airplanes and stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you guys do have a lot of people that come down and stay there for times. And we are talking about in August, which means that you're still in vacation
Mm-hmm.
season. There's still people that are visiting because of the summer. So,
Yeah.
so kind of talk about a little bit when y'all start to see a storm coming off the coast like that. How do you? When did y'all make the determination that it was so severe that y'all needed to start evacuating? Because that did happen.
Yeah. Right. So let me address one thing that you said, and then I'll get to that. So Rockport is a vacation spot for everybody in Texas. It's the little darling of
Right.
Texas, but it's also world famous for
Right.
fishing. And we have, I mean, our guide industry here is along with tourism, our guiding industry is really kind of what drives this town. But so yeah, we've had, George Strait has a house here. He still has it. He was in here right after the hurricane and trying to do everything he could to help us with the recovery process. People that I've seen just since I've been here: Johnny Depp, Harrison Ford. Let's see, Margaritaville, Jimmy Buffett, and Alan Jackson. So there's a lot of really famous
Right.
people that come through here, and those are people that you know of, but there's also people that you may not know of that are like business execs
Right.
that own oil companies or own chemical companies or
Strings
whatever
of car
that come here
dealerships.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly. We have another one of those. I'll leave him nameless,
Yeah.
but yeah, we have one. He flies in
Right.
routinely, has a house here, has a house in Fort Worth, and he flies back and forth. But that yeah, it affected more than just the people of Texas when Rockport got
Exactly.
hit, but and so consequently we have a lot of people helping out, other than just Rockportians and Texans. And by the way, there's nobody helps out in a disaster more than Texans do, especially a disaster in Texas. But if you have a disaster in a neighboring state, Texans are going to go help you. But definitely, if something happens within the state, you can count on people from Amarillo, Abilene, Athens. They're all going to
Yeah, I
come
saw
here.
that firsthand. That was
But
crazy.
yeah, I mean, you never really know until you see it happening. But I tell you this, we owe a big debt of gratitude to all the people of Texas, and we're going to pay it forward anytime we get the opportunity. We don't want to, but if we have to, we will. So yeah, you inquired about when did we make our decision about what we were going to do. So that you kind of have a plan going in to any hurricane season, any year. And so fortunately, I think for our community is our county judge requested back in June of 2017. So this is before we could have ever fathomed Harvey. He asked for every department head to come up with their hurricane plan if they haven't updated it recently to update it and send it in. So we all did, and we all evaluated, and we had workshops, and we compared notes, and we all kind of decided what was going to be the best thing for each department and dovetail that.
Let me stop you right here because I think it's important.
Yeah.
You're FEMA certified as well, correct? You are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I've had some. I can tell you right now that I didn't use any. I used just the good old boy network a lot.
Right.
If you've ever seen the movie Shawshank Redemption, I was Red for a long time. I was a man that knew how to get things. You might call me a looter, but I just feel like I was a man that knew how to acquire things that were needed.
Yeah, but that came in handy though. You were very important to how this all planned out. I just wanted people to understand that as far as you have a lot of experience in this area, and so that definitely helps a lot of things. So continue. I'm sorry, I just wanted to.
So I would say that my wheeler dealer skills helped me more than anything FEMA could have ever taught me. And I get that from my grandfather. He taught me to be a wheeler dealer.
Yeah.
So always give a fair shake to everybody, but walk away feeling like you got more to give. But anyway, and I did a lot of 3-way deals, 4-way deals. It was a big barter system right afterwards. So it was, you just do what you got to do to survive. You never know what you can do till you get in that position. I mean, I was bathing with a gallon jug of water until I saw my brother-in-law bathe with 1/3 of a gallon of water, and then I felt like I was way too decadent in my bathing. So I started bathing with a third of a gallon of water, and so a gallon of water would last 3 days.
Well, we'll talk about that.
But,
we'll talk about all that in just a second. So back to June.
No, but so when we made our decision so going back to June of 17, and we all got together as a county and as a local area, really, and decided how we would handle a hurricane if it happened. We just kind of thought we're never going to need it. It's going to be a 1 in a million shot if we ever get a hurricane. And then all of a sudden you have a
when was the last time you'd
depression.
had one?
I think it was in the 70s.
Okay, gotcha.
The last time they'd had Celia or something, I think, down here, or Carla. Anyway, there hadn't been anything knocked down by a hurricane here in a lot of years.
Right.
In fact, I think the last hurricane that affected this area actually hit Corpus, and Rockport was on the high water side, so there was some flooding. And then 100 years ago, in 1919, there was a leveling hurricane that came through here and schwacked Rockport pretty good. And the people, there are still a few buildings that were around then that are in some old photographs and stuff, and you can see everything around them's underwater. So we would have been in a lot worse shape if we would have been on the high water side of this hurricane. Fortunately, we were just on the high wind side. But nevertheless, so we started in June, and then everybody just kind of put their plans on the back burner. And then all of a sudden we had the tropical depression that was moving across the Yucatan, and we started perking up and paying attention, and National Weather Service started getting involved. We have a guy in Corpus that's a hurricane expert, and the county defers to him for everything as far as warnings and evacuation orders and emergency declarations and everything. So he became a big player at that time. And I think the hurricane hit on a Friday, and that was like Monday or Tuesday that we started watching this depression. And I think that was actually still out in the Atlantic at that time. And some of the models were showing that it could come into the Gulf. Well, then we get in, now fast forward to Wednesday. I'm going to meetings probably 3 times a day at this point. We're having briefings from the National Weather Service on what to expect and how it could be. And now they're starting to kind of put a cone of uncertainty over, basically from Port Mansfield, which is at the tip of Texas, all the way up to Galveston. And then, and at that time, Harvey had just come across and was in the Gulf and was now a tropical depression on its way to becoming a tropical storm. I don't know timelines a lot from there because everything runs together. But I'll tell you this. We know now that it went from a tropical depression to a hurricane in 40 hours. So this is why that number is important, because my plan was a 72-hour plan. So I had a 72-hour plan for a hurricane in the Gulf, not just a tropical depression that came across the Yucatan, but a hurricane coming into the Gulf of Mexico. And that was kind of what the standard was. You make a 72-hour plan. Well, Mike Tyson said one time about one of his opponents, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Right.
So we got punched right in the mouth. So our plan kind of was not really a plan at all. It wasn't anything that I was living by anymore. We were just doing what we could to survive. So it was a lot of things. There were a lot of things that were mitigating factors in, I think, in how we took the hurricane whenever it happened. We probably could have been readier for it, but in reality, you just have to react. And so I had in my list of things that we were going to do. I'll give you a quick example. We have hurricane plexiglass that we were going to put on the airport terminal building. And we put it on the airport terminal building all the way around. And so the way this plexiglass goes on, it's corrugated, but you can see through it. So it looks kind of like sheet metal, but it's clear plastic. And we have a lot of windows on the terminal. And so you take a panel of it. It's about 4 foot, I guess it's about 3 foot wide, and however tall the window is, they're custom cut. And then you put it up onto the window, and then there's these studs that are on channels at the top and the bottom of the window, and you just line the holes up with the panel over those studs, which is basically just a screw. And then you put all of the screws through the holes on the panel, and then you tighten everything down with wing nuts. And under ideal conditions, it's probably not that difficult. I had never done it. I didn't even simulate it, but I gave it a unit of work that I thought it was going to represent on my plan. And so I thought, this is going to take one guy
Oh,
about 4 hours
mm-hmm.
to do the whole building, and it ended up taking two guys 2 days
Oh my gosh.
to do it. And so my budget for time was blown out of the water with that. So what did that cost us? Well, it cost us having bodies that could go around the airport and double check hangar doors, double check locks and cane bolts and things like that that you really could help shore up some of these buildings, to stow loose items, to figure out a way to anchor portable buildings and equipment and things like that. So we're already kind of behind the gun. And I had two people that evacuated. Two of my crew evacuated, and I wasn't planning on that. They weren't required to stay, but I'd had a verbal commitment from them that they would, and then they left. Not saying anything bad about them. Everybody has the right to do what they want. I could have left, but I chose to stay. And that was a decision I made with my wife and my family. But the thing about running out of time is, that was never more evident than the next morning when I woke up and there was basically nothing left. Everything was gone. And I had a huge feeling of guilt for a long time that I should have done more. I should have tried more and planned better and worked harder. And I probably could have secured some doors because, you're hearing now from engineers and people that are coming in and looking at your destruction. Well, the wind obviously breached this door. And when the door breached, you lost the whole building. So what if I had checked that door and made sure that the cane bolts were down or the chains were locked or something, and I didn't get a chance to do that. So, Texas Department of Transportation Aviation Division asked me to give a lessons learned and best practices presentation at one of the conferences that followed the hurricane. And I did. And, going on what information I had at the time, I kind of basically told them what I just told you. What I know now is something completely different, and I don't feel so bad about things anymore. I think a lot of the buildings that we had here were not going to sustain 130 or 40 miles an hour for as many hours as they did.
Right.
The hurricane sat on us for 13 hours. We had 13 hours of hurricane force winds. We had 24 hours of tropical storm force winds. So it's just like anything else that's made out of metal or mortar or brick or stick. You wobble it back and forth enough and it's going to break loose.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what happened. And I'm not saying that, we had inferior structures here. They could have been built to, 120, 130 miles an hour. But, back and forth over time is going to wear something out. It's going to fall down. So I don't feel as bad as I did back then. I feel very fortunate to have survived it.
Yeah.
And I probably wouldn't ever stay for another major hurricane again. A major hurricane is a Cat 3 or higher. But I think a Cat 2, I'd probably go to the beach.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not afraid of a Cat 2.
What was Harvey? Cat 4. So, so I'm glad that you mentioned that, because when you say that Rockport really got hit by the wind, obviously Houston got hit by the water. So it's two different kinds of devastation, two different kinds of destruction. And so,
right.
And Port Aransas.
Well, Houston got hit by rainwater.
Right.
And we also got rainwater. Houston got somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 inches of water, but
flooding.
Really, when I talk about the high water side of the hurricane, I mean the wave wall that comes ashore. And that actually came ashore in Aransas County, but it just didn't come ashore in Rockport proper. That fortunately, and there's some people that will say no, unfortunately, but I think fortunately, where the high surge came ashore in Aransas County was a largely agricultural part of the county. So there was a community called Holiday Beach and Lamar. They're on the other side of the bridge from the airport here, the big bridge going out of town. You crossed it, and that's where the high water came ashore. So a lot of people in Holiday Beach, the destruction on a percentage basis was much higher in Holiday Beach and Lamar than it was in Rockport and Fulton.
Wow. Well, and it started like when I would drive in. So the way that I go is I go through Victoria, and you started to see, even in Victoria, you started to see trees that were split in half, stuff like that.
Well, Victoria experienced a Category 1 hurricane.
Wow, and that's really far inland. I mean, that's what, an hour away from Rockport.
Yeah. Right.
So you started kind of seeing it there. And then when you drove into Rockport, I mean, I remember I came down about a month after it happened. And no, I came down probably 2 weeks after it happened.
Yeah, you were real close to right
Yeah.
after
And
it happened.
so it was insane, the amount of debris that there was in that town. I mean, it was just crazy. So, so after that happened, talk kind of a little bit about the infrastructure of a city when it goes through something like that, the plumbing and the, you know, the cell phone towers, and how long that affected y'all after that hurricane hit.
Well, so, okay, you got, let's take cell phone towers. They were non-existent. Telephone poles, utility poles, they were all snapped. 100% of them were gone. And the utility lines were down. There was no electricity. And keep in mind, we're at the end of the line for electricity. So as they're repairing the electrical lines back toward the supply station, we're at the end of the line. So we went 21, 22, 3 days, something like that, without electricity here. And I don't mean just at the airport. I mean countywide. Water was off for a couple of weeks. And the reason is because so many houses were completely destroyed. Well, if your water department if the lines are charged and a house is gone, then water's just shooting up out of the ground. So necessarily they had to turn the water off. And then the other problem you had was that sewer lines were open. If a house is torn down and the toilet's ripped off the flange, then you have a sewer line now exposed. And you have flood waters. Well, where's that flood water going? It's going into your septic system or into your sewer lines. And since we recycle the water here, it's flooding and overcharging our sewer lines. And so we had way too much water in the system. Not just that it was bad water or rainwater, it was just there was too much of it. We couldn't process it.
I think that's totally of all the things that happened, I think that part of it is what people would be most surprised about. Obviously, you know that utility lines and cell phone towers during a windstorm gone, but you don't think about the plumbing. You don't think about how that whole system works. And so when I would get there, I'm like, why don't you have water? Plumbing is underground. What does that have anything to do with it? But then you started explaining it, and it made total sense. And it's crazy how much had to happen just to get the water turned back.
Well, trust me, there are people that are a lot smarter than me that are on top of it. I have a neighbor that he's over the public works for the city, and he's got skins on the wall. This guy he's a dude, man. He's been around and done a lot of things. And Rockport was very fortunate to have him decide he wanted to retire here. Well, he was goaded into taking the position that he has. He would just as soon be fishing, but he actually plied his wares as our public service manager, and he knew what to expect. He had all that planned and ready to go, and it was they attacked it right away. And it wasn't long before he was actually turning the water on for a few hours every day.
Right.
They had managed to turn off enough meters throughout the town that we were able to turn the water on for a little while. So after a couple of weeks, we were able to get showers.
But in the immediate aftermath, one of the things that struck me as just crazy, y'all didn't have any electricity in any buildings, but you did have some generators. And you also had emergency personnel like police officers, some of them that did stay. Well, they were working very long hours, and they were using the building to basically live out of, but without sewage for a couple of days. So, could you imagine being a police officer that's working 12, 18-hour days, however long they were doing it, and having to live in a police building with all the other police officers there with toilets that don't flush or water that's not
on? And let me tell you something. There's the first rule about post-hurricane septic is you don't talk about post-hurricane septic. Then I'll tell you sometime other than on your podcast about how that was handled. But it was, you just have to manage it like you manage everything else. But it was horrible. It was the nastiest thing you can imagine.
There's so much that goes into it that people don't realize,
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Every single aspect of your life is affected, And I want to say this too before I forget. So we have two big players in our town with respect to like grocery stores. We have Walmart Supercenter, and then we have HEB. All right. So HEB is a Texas-based company, and so I think you can expect a little bit more from any company that's Texas-based. Any person that's from Texas, you can expect more from. It's just how we are. It's in our blood. And then you got Walmart, which is more of a corporate structure, and so they take their orders all the way from the top, as opposed to letting anybody on the local level make decisions. And I'm not going to bash Walmart, but what I'm going to do is tell you how awesome HEB is.
Mm-hmm.
So
Careful,
HEB
because you
was
have a
at
lot of
every
Grand Prairians that really want an HEB in our town, so this will probably.
Y'all need to get one. I'm telling you, you need to get one. They're real strong in South
Yeah.
Texas, but I think there's maybe, I don't know if there's just too much competition in
Yep.
North Texas
Yep.
or what it is, but I think you have to go down to Burleson to
Yep.
get one. But HEB was such a good partner for us. I mean, and that relationship continues. But they were willing to do some things, and I'll just tell you right now, we don't have a morgue, okay, in our county. We're a small county. We rely on Nueces County, which is Corpus Christi, for all the medical examiner and mortuary or morgue services, rather. And so HEB said, we're going to bring down a reefer unit and a reefer trailer, a refrigerated trailer. And they said, we will donate it as a morgue. And full knowing that as soon as one dead body goes in that trailer can never be used again to haul food or anything else. It will always be, it'll have to be destroyed essentially after that. And they didn't care. They brought it down because they knew we didn't have one. It had a generator running on it the entire time, and it rode out the storm, and it was ready to be here in the event that we needed to store bodies. And fortunately, we didn't. I think there were only 2 attributable deaths to Harvey, and those were handled. I think they were kind of found later, and they were able to be dealt with in the regular way. But that just tells you what kind of neighbor they are. That was an ugly thing to have to say and do. But they were ready to volunteer for it. They did, and they were open quickly. Now their store didn't get as much damage as Walmart did. Walmart got opened like a tuna can, but HEB they had a lot of damage, but they got right on it. I mean, there were 18-wheelers lined up to get into our town that had HEB's logo on the side. I had them stored out here at the airport. We've got a ton of ramp space, and we had them out here. They were full of water, full of food and goods and stuff like that. So that stuff was just pouring in.
Yeah, and I'll throw awesome. A shout out to another Texas-based company. Well, was Texas-based at the time, which is Whataburger. Was one of the first restaurants that was opened, and when you had an influx of people that come down there to help in a national disaster, you don't think about the fact that there's no food, there's no grocery stores that are open, all that stuff. So Whataburger opened up, and we drove, me and Reagan, your wife Reagan, and I were driving down the street, and they were like, free hamburgers, and I was like, I turned around, and I swear it was probably the president of Walmart or Whataburger that was handing out hamburgers that day.
Yeah. That's right. That's exactly who it was.
Which is really, really neat to see.
Today's nonprofit spotlight is on CareFlight, located at 3110 Great Southwest Parkway in Grand Prairie. CareFlight is the only fully integrated medical transport company serving North Texas and offers medical transports in helicopters, airplanes, and ground ambulances. They operate 6 helicopter bases in and around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, all equipped with blood products and chest compression machines, and transport with CareFlight is ideal for transplant programs needing to move patients, organs, and/or transplant teams without delay. CareFlight offers membership programs for unlimited medically necessary transports for as low as $49 per year. To find out more about their program, call 972-339-4214 or go to careflight.org. That's FLITE.org. CareFlight, making precious moments count.
So there's a couple things that I want to make sure that you talk about, and one of those things is the visit by the president, or the vice president, not the president, which he did come down. And you don't have to go into a whole lot of detail about how that worked, but what I do find very interesting is you talked about him coming and just the debris that was on the runway and how difficult it was just to even get his plane landed. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, yeah. So let me get back to the food real quick because, word started getting out what we needed here. I mean, word travels fast, and everybody was here. I mean, they were from all over, and they had the name of their cities shoe polished across the back of their windshield, so you could kind of tell who was who. But people were coming in, and word was getting out, hey, they need food, because we were eating MREs, man. And I don't know if you've ever had an MRE, and I had MREs in the military, and they were actually pretty good. These MREs, It's a meal ready to eat.
Oh,
It's basically a government
gosh.
meal, government packed meal. But these MREs were not made by the same manufacturer that made ours in the military. The ones in the military actually were pretty good. These were horrible. I mean, just basic life sustaining meal kit is what this was. And so people got the word out really quickly. We needed food here like
Right.
yesterday. So then you start seeing the Houstonians and the or not Houstonians, I guess they were having their own problem, but people from San Antonio and Austin that were dragging in their their big barbecue grills on
Right.
trailers and so what do people in Texas when they drag their barbecue grill and what are they going to cook? It's brisket. So for a long time I couldn't eat a brisket tortilla because they were just there was one on every corner.
Smelled good when I drove in,
and then
though.
the Red Cross. Yeah. And then the Red Cross was also, they had a food kitchen here, trailers, and they were asking people because they knew our freezers were going out. We didn't have electricity. So they put the notice out to people of town, bring us everything in your freezer and we'll figure out a way to cook it. And so they started cooking turkeys and, fried French fries and everything you have in your freezer at home. We were bringing it to them and they were cooking it, preparing it for everybody. Yeah, it was kind of a communal supper every night, but anyway, so the question that you'd asked was about the vice president coming, and so right after the storm, we went to work picking up sheet metal, and really the big problem was screws. Everywhere you have sheet metal, you have sheet metal screws, and every time a sheet metal panel or a hangar door or anything made out of sheet metal was tumbling across the airport, it was dropping screws the entire time. And then anytime you moved it, if you picked it up and piled it somewhere, you were dropping screws when you did it. So we were picking up screws, and I mean 5-gallon buckets full of screws. We have golf carts out here that we maintain the airport with. We have other vehicles too, but we were driving these golf carts around until they were out of gas or the batteries were dead, just picking up screws. Every single vehicle we have out here at the airport had screws in the tires. So one of the biggest things we needed from people flying relief stuff in was we needed fix-a-flat and we needed tire repair stuff. So they started flying that in, and there's a whole other tangent that I could go down, and we may have time for it. I could go down about how the aviation community helped us. But anyway, so they were flying stuff in, and they were taking requests, and so we were telling them fix-a-flat. We don't need diapers, for crying out loud. Everybody that had a baby left. We need fix-a-flat.
Right.
So. And forget the toothpaste, bring us, tire plugs. And so they did, and we were able to kind of get back up on our feet with just fix-a-flat. And then folks with mobile tire repair companies started coming into town and volunteering their services, and they were helping people on the sides of the roads and stuff because it was still a big issue even downtown. But because a lot of the buildings here were just kind of made out of sheet metal, like metal buildings. Yeah. Anyway, so we have all this sheet metal all over the airport and all up and down the runways and in the infield. And I've got a crew of 3 people basically that are working to try to do that. And it's hot, keep in mind, it's still August.
You're literally working 20 hours a day at this point. I mean, you're there pretty much because Reagan and your son were gone at this point. You were there. Yeah. So it was just crazy how much you were there.
I was going home. I basically would go home long enough to just make sure my house was okay and that it wasn't open and I wasn't just, losing everything to mold.
Right.
And I had a generator that I was operating at the house where I had some dehumidifiers going and stuff like that I would just go home and I would fill it. Well, I ended up being basically the generator maintenance man for a lot of people. And I won't name them all, but there were a lot of people that couldn't do it for themselves. And not that I'm not trying to say that I'm a, Mr. Volunteer of the Year award winner or anything like that, but I just knew that they couldn't do it themselves. And so I was helping some folks out. But, you start to realize how few hours there are in the day and you get stretched really thin.
And then you get told that the vice president of the country is coming.
Yeah, the vice president's coming now on day 5. Well, one other interesting thing that happened is, again, Texans help Texans. Texas Department of Transportation dispatched, before the hurricane ever made landfall, they dispatched a crew of 5 guys to come help out just us at the airport. Well, naturally, they had to wait until the hurricane passed before they could come in, but they were some of the first responders. They were definitely our first responders here. And so those guys came in within 2 days after the hurricane. They stayed in San Antonio until they got the all clear that they could come in. I wasn't expecting them. I didn't know, no communication had been sent to me, but even if it had, it would have just gone to a busy signal. But so those guys, they came in and and they had a few pieces of equipment. And one of the biggest things that they didn't have was a sweeper. And I told them we needed a sweeper big time. So one of their guys jumped in the truck and he ran down to the TxDOT yard that's in Rockport. And he basically stole the sweeper that was there because there wasn't anybody there to tell him not to. And he had a key that worked. So he took it and brought it back up here. And it was just basically like a Bobcat.
Right.
You know what a Bobcat is, a little skid steer. And it had a little 6-foot rotary sweeper on the front of it. Not even a vacuum, but just a sweeper. So they swept our runways and taxiways and just basically swept all the screws and small debris out into the apron area, the grass around the airport, around the pavement. And then, you know, me and my crew concentrated on the bigger pieces and making piles out of that. The Navy used it as a training facility, or uses our base as a training facility, our airport. And so they sent guys over to help us get it cleaned up too. I mean, obviously they had an interest in it. They wanted to get back to training. So they sent 50 lieutenants and ensigns over here to help clean up. And we got a lot done that day. One guy got bit by a snake. Another guy got stung by a scorpion. There were lots of bee stings, lots of sunburns and mosquito bites, but we got it done. And and the snake bite was non-lethal. It was a non-poisonous snake, little rat snake bit this guy. And but anyway, so now we have all these piles of debris all over the airport, and from the air. And I did get to see it from the air a couple of times, but it looked like we had asterisks everywhere. It's like you can land here, but you know, you can make the approach to that runway, but you know, the asterisk being right there, it was kind of neat. That was funny. I have a vivid imagination. But anyway, so all these asterisks are all over the field, and then and the TxDOT crew that had been here for a couple of days helping us out, for them it was a good trade because there was nowhere to stay. They were staying in the cabs of their trucks. So we have a pilot's lounge on the airport that's attached to the airport here, and because we had generators running here, there was AC. So we traded them some space to stay, and they traded a lot of work for us. But nevertheless, they're getting ready to leave, and the vice president's coming to town. So Secret Service is here. You know, they've been here for a little while, and then for like almost a day, and then as the vice president. As his motorcade is making its way back to the airport. Now, keep in mind, they flew into Victoria, and then he took a windshield tour to Rockport, and then he was going to fly out of our airport. So he didn't fly in here; he was only going to fly out. Well, I guess their expeditionary unit is a group of about 25 Marines and 5 V-22 Osprey helicopters. Those are made by Bell Helicopter right there in Hurst, Texas. But anyway, so the Ospreys come in, and I'm familiar with Ospreys and how they operate and everything. So they came in under ground taxi, which means their tires were on the ground and they were rolling in under low power. And so they staged up right there. And a few hours later, when the vice president rolled onto the flight line, Secret Service told us, you know, hey, you guys we're going to lock the terminal down for a minute, and we're going to let the dignitaries and everybody get on board. Texas Governor Abbott was here, and some members of the cabinet and everything. So they all get out onto these 5 helicopters, aircraft helicopters, and you know what the Osprey is? It's a tilt wing helicopter, essentially, that can fly like an airplane and then also operates like a helicopter. So, in other words, it can do basically vertical takeoff and landing. Well, it's a very powerful helicopter at that. And so whenever they got the vice president and everybody on board and they load it up, they take on this whole different set of flight characteristics. Like they get really aggressive now. When we got the principal is on board, we have to get out of this airspace like somebody's going to shoot a missile at us. And so they powered up, and then they air taxied back to the runway. Air taxi is different than ground taxi because now the wheels are off the ground, and there's a considerable amount of rotor wash coming off of the props and the rotors from these Ospreys. So, and you got 5 of them back to back to back, and they're all basically under full power. And as they taxied by our asterisks that were all over the ground, which an asterisk again was sheet metal, but they were basically blowing those things apart, and sheet metal was flying in every direction, and it looked kind of dangerous. But at the same time, we recognized that the sheet metal is now flying back up on the pavement. It's going, everywhere we just dragged it off of, and again, there's still sheet metal screws hanging on to these panels, and sheet metal screws are going everywhere. And then the vice president and the Marines all took off. Well, I looked at the TxDOT crew and said, you guys are not going anywhere if I have to hold you myself. But so they agreed, and so they stayed for another day and helped us clean up. But it delayed us. It was nice having him here, and I think it was a great show of support for our community to have him here and come. He helped a woman haul some debris to the curb. That was a good photo op for him, and he's a nice guy. Nobody will ever say that he's not, but we didn't need that. I would just have preferred they just said, hey, we're here if you need us, what can we do? And what we needed was send support,
or for him to come later when things might have been a little bit
come
more,
later,
right? I thought,
right. So Texas governor has been here multiple times since, and it's a lot different now. When he comes, his security detail, they know the way around here pretty well, and they don't lock us down, and definitely don't hamper our operations when he comes here. Senator Cruz has been here a number of times. We love it when he comes here, and he doesn't lock us down or anything. When he doesn't hamper our operations. But I know how things are when you have the president in town. I mean, I was in the Air Force. I controlled Air Force One. I know that there's not another plane on your scope whenever Air Force One's flying across. So I know. And that's necessarily so. I understand it.
Yeah.
But it just didn't help us.
Right. Right. And it's not that it was intentionally trying to be like that. It's definitely a show of support. So we only have about 5 minutes left, and I know you got to get back to work and all that. So one of the things I did want to ask you, I just interviewed Bonnie, which she's with our Grand Prairie Historical Organization, and you mentioned the last time we talked, you don't just lose the infrastructure, but you do lose some pieces of history when a town gets blown like that. So there was one tree in particular you talked to me about that I thought you don't think about that. Can you talk a little bit about the trees and how they played into y'all's loss? Because there was one that had been there for a really long time, right?
Well, yeah, the oldest tree in Texas is a live oak in Lamar. It's in Aransas County, but it's in Lamar, which is on the opposite side of the big bridge that I live on here, and it's 1,000 years old or better.
Wow.
So it's been here for a long time, and then around it are what they call its babies or its offspring. So these were acorns that had fallen off of this live oak tree, and these trees, some of them were 500, 600, 800 years old. Even right here beside the airport, we have a couple that are 400 years old. So these old trees, a lot of the older trees around that big live oak tree died.
Yeah.
And or they were uprooted. And see, the thing about a live oak tree is there's no tap. And a lot of trees have a tap root, and that helps anchor it in the ground. Well, these live oak trees don't have tap roots, and the sand, Rockport is primarily sand for about 30 feet down, and then you hit a clay strata. But that sand, think about when you're at the beach and you start patting the sand close to the water with your hand, and what happens? The water comes up and the sand starts to get kind of loose. Well, that's what happened. That back and forth that we talked about over and over again, the saturation of water in the sand eventually loosened the soil enough on a lot of trees that they just fell over. And a lot of trees, most of the trees that survived were little trees, really, because they weren't quite as much of a they didn't catch as much wind as the big trees did. All the trees lost their leaves. Now you can the next time you get a chance, go out to a live oak, see one. They're all over North Texas. Just take a leaf in between your finger and your index finger and your thumb, and just kind of tug on it and see. Just imagine how many pounds of pressure it takes to pull that thing off. Every tree was stripped of its leaves, and it looked like Mars. And which here. When you don't have any leaves on the tree, that's kind of unusual because live oaks keep their leaves pretty much all year long. So we've always got greenery around here, but you just don't realize how lost you get, how different everything looks when there's no visual marker.
Right, exactly.
There were no street signs anymore. There were no traffic lights. And so, especially coming in on the highway, it was really hard to even remember where your exit was.
Right.
You just have to create a whole new set of markers for yourself.
But fortunately, y'all kept y'all didn't lose any major historical landmarks, did you?
Well, we lost some. There were some. A lot of our history was damaged. I'm on the historical commission for the county, and so we're still dealing with that. I mean, a lot of our markers, just our historic markers. The plaques that you'll see from time to time. A lot of those were damaged or destroyed. I mean, a bunch of them. And so our historical commission has been working real hard just to try to get those replaced. There's some holdup right now with the state because I think the foundry that makes those markers is out of business, and they're trying to find a new foundry. But it's been a challenge even to get little things like that done. And then you got historic places that took a lot of damage. You have historic sites that were damaged, and we just don't know where we're at yet. I mean, we don't know what new normal is. We're still taking inventory on that, to be honest with you.
And it's 3 years later.
We had 77 historical sites in Aransas County, and right now we've evaluated about 57 of them that we feel like are okay. We're just still getting through it, one at a time.
Well, Mike, I just really appreciate you being here, and I just just respect the heck out of you. I always have, and when you went through this and me witnessing what, I know you don't want to be claimed as volunteer of the year, but I'll go ahead and say it. You did an amazing job, and and your community appreciates it. So thank you so much for being here with me.
No, I made it look a lot harder than it was. And
that is something you would say.
But I tell you what, you never really know what you can do until you're faced with some adversity, and I feel kind of fortunate that I got faced with it before I was too old to have done anything about it. And I feel like I reacted like I planned on. I didn't surprise myself. I didn't underwhelm myself. So, but I think most people would probably find they would do the same thing. I just did what I had to do to survive and protect people I love.
Well, they really appreciate it, and you're one of my very best friends, and I really am honored to have known you, and I'm just not to have known you, to know you.
That feeling's mutual. That feeling is mutual, Jenna. I'm so glad that I met you, and you're such a good friend of my wife.
Yes.
So certainly appreciate that.
Well, thanks. Have a great day.
I'll do it. I'm already doing it.
Sounds good. Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.